Make sure you clean out that snorkel and take a deep breath because you're diving on into the card pool. I'm your host, Kyle Robertson.
And I'm Stu Galetta.
And today we're talking about the top 10 money cards of Tempest.
This is part 2 of our 2-part set review. Be sure to check out our previous in which we talked about the top 10 hidden gems that we found in this set. But without further ado, let's start the review.
Let's start indeed. So first of all, coming in at number 1 for Tempest at the price of $35, we have a land called Wasteland. This is really a very simple land in that it taps to give you either 1 colorless mana, or it taps to sacrifice itself and destroy target non-basic land. We've seen a lot of these kinds of lands so far doing these videos, and I don't really have to tell you why this is good. As mean as it kind of is, land destruction is pretty good, especially because there are just so many powerful lands out there that deserve to get destroyed. Wasteland is actually a little bit fairer than some in my book because it can only destroy non-basic lands. So chances are you're getting rid of something that probably needs to go away. You can't just be mean like with a strip mine and destroy somebody's basic lands just because. So a slightly more balanced version of that perhaps, but still very powerful, and it's no surprise that this is as pricey as it is.
It's a staple for almost every deck that exists, just for the fact that you said, Kyle, being able to destroy a land that isn't a basic is always valuable. If you think about the lands that are pretty expensive that have awesome effects tagged on them, you have Gaia's Cradle, Glacial Chasm, Maze of Ith. All of them can be a huge headache, and being able to get around those are very, very important.
Also, tacking this kind of effect onto a land, as is the case with any kind of utility land, means you don't have to waste space in your deck main decking a spell that has this ability. You can just throw it on a land that also gives you mana. I should also note that Wasteland doesn't come into play tapped, so it can tap for colorless straight up. However, I will say, I don't really love land destruction all that much. If I'm going to do it, I prefer a nicer version like Ghost Quarter, but hey, some people like it, and it's great at what it does.
Well, moving into something in the category of lands still, our number 2 for $30 is Earthcraft. It costs 1 of anything in a green, and it's an enchantment. And it reads simply, tap an untapped creature you control, untap target basic land. So what really screams for this to be abused by is boosting mana like crazy. And you can come up with ways to make near infinite amounts of mana. Now, there's tons of cards out there that make it so that when you tap a land for mana, it can produce additional mana. You have Zendikar Resurgent, you have Mirari's Wake, and you have Mana Reflection. So being able to get multiple mana off a land and being able to untap it for additional mana is really, really powerful. It makes it so it's easy for you to catch up if you're losing, makes it really easy for you to pull ahead and make it so people can't catch up to you. And this can happen at instant speed. So if you can go ahead and deplete your mana reservoir on your turn, and then go ahead and have mana to hold up for instance on other people's turns.
This card reminds me of a similar card that was printed a lot later called Cryptolith Rite, which basically does, for the most part, the exact same thing in that it's a 2-mana green enchantment that allows your creatures to let you produce extra mana. Of course, in the case of Cryptolith Rite, it's a little bit weaker because it requires the creatures actually to tap in order to produce mana. If they don't have haste, that's a no-go. However, the reason Earthcraft is better, even though it only targets basic lands, and the reason why it does command this price tag is because it's part of an infamous 2-card combo, which is Squirrel's Nest plus Earthcraft. Squirrel's Nest was an old enchantment that you enchanted a land, and you could tap that land to make a 1/1 squirrel token instead of actually tapping for mana. Not great by itself, and Earthcraft by itself might not be all that powerful, but these 2 cards combined, as I said, made an infinite combo where you just made an arbitrarily large number of squirrels and won the game, mostly at instant speed. So that's the reason why Earthcraft is on everyone's radar. Well, it looks like we're just kind of sticking with the land theme here because at number 3 on our list of the top 10 money cards of Tempest, coming in at $29, is another land, and it's called Ancient Tomb. This is a land that simply does tap to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool, and if you do, Ancient Tomb deals 2 damage to you. This will probably immediately draw comparisons to Temple of the False God, which again is a land that taps for 2 colorless mana, but has a drawback of it not working unless you have 5 total lands in play. You might look at Ancient Tomb and say, well, why on earth would I play Ancient Tomb instead of Temple of the False God? Because at least Temple, while it might have a little bit of a drawback, isn't going to do 2 damage to me every time I tap it. It's just for the reason that this is an absurd amount of mana for a land that especially doesn't come into play tapped. All you have to do is play this thing, tap it, and you get 2 mana for essentially the price of 1. And of course, with all of the potential mana doubling cards out there, it could be even more than that. So, in the long run, 2 life is probably a small price to pay for that kind of acceleration.
And also, being able to make it so your mana cap is going up not by 1 but by 2 is extremely valuable. And that's why you see a lot of people running ramp spells. Being able to make it so your number is no longer at number 2 up to number 4 is really, really big. So, I mean, just as a standalone land, being able to do that on its own is really powerful.
You see something like a Tarnished Citadel where you have to pay 3 life in order to put 1 mana out there. I'm not a huge fan of that, but in this case, 2 mana for 2 life that I can use the turn that I play the land, okay, I could probably get behind that.
Now, moving on to something that's actually a spell in this case, at our number 4 slot for $28, we have Intuition. This is a 3 mana instant that costs 2 of anything in a blue. Search your library for any 3 cards and reveal them to target opponent. He or she chooses one, puts that card into your hand, and then the rest go into your graveyard. And then afterwards you naturally shuffle your library. This is a really powerful card in the fact that it can thin out your deck if you need it, but you can also find any kind of answer you need. So you may lose 2 of the 3 options that you choose, but again, not all cards are bad in the graveyard. So again, you're running blue, Wonder could be a card, so they could be like, alright, I'd rather not give you this, over this, discard Wonder, something like that. But also to note, you can get multiple copies of the same type of card. Yes, Commander is a singleton format, but you do see cards that seem to run a similar theme. So like Washout's a card that's in blue. Cyclonic Rift is a card that's in blue. And Evacuation is a blue card. So, I mean, if you look at it, alright, if you really need to make it so that you can clear the board, you can still do it. And, I mean, yes, you'll lose 2 of your answers for later down the line, but at this point, for 3 mana, at instant speed, you might just need it right then and there.
Any players that are veterans of Magic know how good a card like Gifts Ungiven is. And the fact that Intuition is basically Gifts Ungiven, but with 1 less card for selection, but 1 less mana as well, makes it just uber powerful on its own. As you pointed out, Stu, there are many, many ways to set up these kinds of cards where you basically present your opponent with a no-win scenario, where they have to pick the least bad of all almost equally bad options. Not least of which means you're tutoring any card in your deck into your hand for free, and the other 2 going to the graveyard is probably just setting up some kind of stupid graveyard shenanigans play. So, like I said, these kind of cards are just a win-win for you as long as you're smart in playing them.
And you'll typically see an effect like this in budget modes where, like, Fact or Fiction is being used over this. And, I mean, if Gifts Ungiven was legal in Commander, how many people would be running that? Like, it would be astronomically high.
Exactly. Well, sticking with the card selection theme here, we're going to go to our number 5, which is an artifact weighing in at $27. It's called Scroll Rack, and it costs 2 to play. Now, you can tap 1 mana and tap it. Choose any number of cards in your hand and set those cards aside. Put an equal number of cards from the top of your deck into your hand, and then put the cards that you set aside on top of your deck in any order. This, again, drawing comparisons between these cards and newer cards, will inevitably bring about a comparison to Sensei's Divining Top. And honestly, looking at these 2 cards, I couldn't tell you which one is better. On one hand, Sensei's Divining Top gives you a smaller possible card selection, depending on, I guess, how large your hand is, but more dependable in my opinion, and also it will allow you to, in an emergency, save itself and draw a card that you really, really need from the top of your deck. However, the argument for Scroll Rack is that, again, depending on the size of your hand, Scroll Rack can provide much more utility card selection, and potential setup for combos. Because let's think about it. If you have a card in your hand that you really have no way to play because you don't have a combo piece, and oh look, you use Scroll Rack, find the card from the top of your deck that will enable that combo, basically rearrange it, so you draw it next turn, big deal, you've got it. And that's just the floor of things that you can do with Scroll Rack. Any kind of card that, one, is an artifact, a super supported type, and two, sticks around to provide almost unlimited card advantage, it's fantastic, and I don't have that much more to say about it.
The comparison you said, Kyle, is very good. Like, Scroll Rack or Sensei's Divining Top, that is like one of the big questions. And I mean, the way how I like to look at it, because I do love running both of these when I get the chance, Scroll Rack has the ability to dig deeper, but it also has the potential to be a whiff. And the fact that, like, all right, let's say I have a whole bunch of lands in my hand. All right, I can go ahead and put those on top, but I get to see the next handful of cards and put those in. The more cards I play reduces the amount of cards that I can then look at in the future. But also, if the cards I put on the top are going to be my new cards to draw, and I don't want them, it makes it so I'm stuck in a situation where, like, all right, I'm going to be in trouble after this turn. So, I mean, it has the potential to whiff. Now, granted, there's a lot of fetch lands out there and other tutor cards that make it so you can shuffle the deck, which will, again, change what's on top. So that isn't always a huge factor to be holding you back from playing this card, but it is something to be wary of. At our number 6 slot, for the lovely price of $23, you can have an Aloran. It costs 4 mana, 2 of anything, and double green, and like I said, it is an enchantment. Any player may play a creature spell with total casting cost 3 or less whenever he or she could play an instant, and without paying its mana cost. Yes, what this thing is a global enchantment for all players that makes it so any little character you have in your hand can come into play for free, at instant speed, for free. Let's think about some of the green guys that can come in for free. You have Reclamation Sage, you have Eternal Witness. I mean, and depending on your deck, Wirewood Symbiote. This thing is really good for just making the game bonkers real quick. And I like to think of it as like a green-red chaos card almost, because red loves making the game chaotic. This is a green card that does it. And every time this is out, it just becomes funly nuts.
Yeah, you might look at a card like this and ask, well, why wouldn't you just play something like Vidalcan Orrery, which can go into any deck because it's colorless and does pretty much the same thing? Well, you'd be half right. Something like Vidalcan Orrery does allow you to play anything at instant speed, whereas Aloran only refers to creatures that cost 3 or less. Also, you have to take into account the fact that Aloran can be very much a politics card because it affects everyone equally, more or less, although you can, of course, stack your deck with lower mana cost creatures to make possibly more use of it. However, the fact that you can play said little creatures, ignoring their casting costs, is the big selling point here. This kind of speed and utility is not something that green gets on its own very often, and so it's worth sitting up and paying attention to. This card, when it was in competitive play, was hugely popular, and everybody and their brother was using this, and there is a good reason for it, because free spells is great. Free spells at instant speed is even better. And even though there are some possible drawbacks in giving the ability to all players, and not a potentially big card selection when looking at what can be cast with Aloran, still, the advantage that you can get from something like this is overwhelming.
And also, you can do a lot of stupid, fun little combos with this card. So again, if your commander is like a little dweeby, like Rise the Redeemed, for example, and like I said before with Wirewood Symbiote, you can make it so you can protect your commander each turn by returning to your hand and bringing it right back out the same turn. So you can give yourself a form of protection, or just combos, or like make it so the return effect of some sort of card cost doesn't hurt you, and you get to take full advantage of this. It's a fun card, definitely, and if you haven't played with it before, I strongly suggest you to give it a try.
And it looks like we're sticking with the green cards here, because next on our list at number 7, for the price of $20, is another green enchantment, and it's called Miri's Guile. This costs only 1 green. During your upkeep, you may look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. I hate to bring up Sensei's Divining Top again. Who am I kidding? I love bringing up Sensei's Divining Top. But that said, Miri's Guile is pretty much the green Sensei's Divining Top. Of course, it doesn't have the benefit of letting you draw extra cards, potentially, but otherwise it has much the same effect, except for the fact that it's for free. So every turn before you draw, you get to basically pick what card you draw from among the top 3 cards of your deck. I've said it before with Alurin, and I'll say it again now. This kind of utility and card selection in green is very, very rare. And for that reason alone, Miri's Guile has been very, very popular. And sure, you can play Sensei's Divining Top in just about any deck, but Miri's Guile is a great solution for somebody who might not have necessarily access easily to a top, even though this is slightly more expensive price-wise, you could say, just because it hasn't really ever been reprinted. But can you blame them? This is very good card selection for green, and if you're playing a green deck, you should definitely have this.
I like to think of it as a combination of Divining Top and Sylvan Library. The difference between Sensei's Divining Top and this is that this doesn't do anything the turn it comes into play. But I mean, every upkeep, you get a free, like, alright, I'm going to filter my hand and see which one of these I want to be in it, which is really, really valuable. Sylvan Library has the same kind of effect where it's only on your upkeep, so the turn it comes into play, it doesn't do anything either. Sylvan Library is pretty much the comparative of a budget version of Miri's Guile, and the fact that that is something is really huge. Now, moving away from green and into black, we have a classic card for black. And at number 8 for $19, we have Reanimate. It costs a single black, and it is a sorcery. Put target creature from any graveyard into play under your control. Lose life to that creature's total casting cost. So yeah, take a second to take that in. For 1 mana, any creature in any grave is coming to your side of the field for nothing more than that, except a little bit of life you have to pay. So the bigger the creature, pretty much the bigger the cost. But there are a bunch of good creatures that don't necessarily have a huge cost. Like they might have some sort of stipulation in the text somewhere. So this is a huge card, and especially with how much black loves using the graveyard, like there's Mill. You have ways to discard. And there's so many other ways to just from board wipes. You can just recur things that have already been dead. This is a enormous card in black, and it is so powerful.
This is probably, in fact, the most powerful reanimation spell ever printed, because it just costs 1 mana, and as you said, Stu, you can take the best thing from your opponent's graveyard or the best thing from your graveyard. It doesn't matter. And the fact that it has this drawback, oh, you lose life equal to the thing's converted mana cost, I mean, that really does not matter in the grand scheme of things, because more than likely, the thing that is coming back, it probably won't cost more than 8 or 10 anyway. So that is a fair bit of life to lose if you're playing a 20 life game, but in a 40 life game, that's like nothing. And whatever you're going to get back with this is probably going to win the game on the spot or over the next turn or two. That's pretty much the only reason why you would use Reanimate. This is such a broken card, and it forms the backbone of many competitive decks in older formats.
And even with this card, it's not uncommon to see somebody go ahead and not play a card turn 1. They would rather discard something huge, and then next turn, play a swamp, reanimate, and then you get some sort of huge thing on the field.
Well, moving into white now, we actually haven't seen a white card on this list yet, and it's a pretty good one too. At number 9, for the price of $18, we have the enchantment Humility. Again, it's white, it costs 4 to play, 2 and double white. And it simply says, each creature loses all abilities and is a 1/1 creature. Keep in mind, this is a permanent effect, number 1, so the creatures lose all their abilities and are 1/1s for as long as this thing is in play. However, note also that this does not affect things like +1/+1 counters. If a creature has counters, they're still going to be counted toward how powerful that creature is, so there are certainly ways around the fact that this makes all creatures small. However, the most recent thing that I can probably compare this to, other than Godhead of Awe, which was a creature from the Shadowmoor Eventide block that made all other creatures 1/1 but didn't take away their abilities, is Overwhelming Splendor from the very recently released Hour of Devastation. That pretty much does the exact same thing as this card does, except it's a curse aura, so it only does it to the one enchanted player. But that costs 8 mana. 8 mana. The fact that this affects everyone and costs 4, and this was printed way before Overwhelming Splendor, tells you just how powerful this kind of effect remains. They used to print it at 4 mana, now they think it's worth 8 mana just to do to a single person, and you'd probably be right. Not only is this going to make combat a nightmare because all creatures are really tiny, but also it takes away all of their abilities, all of those triggered abilities, activated abilities, any kind of abilities at all are just all blanked. So this is just going to make the field a bunch of vanillas. Actually can really, really help token decks because it brings everyone down to the same level as you.
It's 4 mana, and it has the same cost of Wrath of God. I have never been able to tell which one I like better in this case. Wrath of God wipes the board clean, but you can still come back from it. Humility just makes it so, hey, I have more than you, and you have to compromise off of that. And that's a whole different style of play. So if you like having your creatures live, for whatever reason, this is a card that makes it so that that can happen. But not only that, like you would see this in a Super Friends deck just to make it so whatever damage is coming at the Planeswalker is nerfed down really low, or if you have like a fog type strategy in which you can handle a little bit of damage coming through and stopping it, is really, really strong. But also one thing to remember, this also works on your creatures as well. So it's got a high risk, high reward. Granted, you choose when it comes into play, but it is powerful nonetheless. I have to agree with you, Kyle. Now going from powerful in white to powerful in blue, this is one of the most powerful blue cards that exist. We're talking at number 10 for $17, Time Warp. It costs 5 mana, 3 of anything, and double blue, and it's a sorcery. Target player takes an extra turn after this one. Blue loves taking turns, and by taking more turns, you can get more answers, and you can dive deeper into your deck. You can establish the board however you want, and if you do it right, you can time warp into another way of taking additional turns. And blue is notorious for doing that in Izzet decks. Being like, alright, I'll play one thing, I'll get an extra turn, like, you may kill me next turn, but let me get another turn to buy myself some more time. And these type of effects are very powerful, and you see them all over the place. Even a deck that isn't abusing, duplicating, and forking different sorceries will definitely run this just for the sake of not losing for a turn.
I don't really have too much to add about this one, Stu, because obviously everybody knows how good taking extra turns can be and the whole host of possibilities that come with it. The one thing I would like to add is that this card pretty much sets the modern day standard for what it takes to take an extra turn. If you remember way back in the day when Magic was first made, the Time Walk card that cost 2 mana to take an extra turn, of course, that was hugely overpowered, and will never be made again, rightly so. That said, a card like Time Warp, for example, which costs 5 mana to take an extra turn, that kind of set the template for everything that came after it. The least amount of mana you can expect to take another turn, at least without some kind of huge drawback, is about 5 mana. I mean, you see a card like Time Stretch, which costs 10 mana and gives you 2 extra turns. It pretty much sticks to the template in that you're paying for Time Warp twice over. That's really all I have to say. Time Warp kind of sets the standard, and the gold standard at that, for taking turns cards, and it is still played today. It has been reprinted several times, will always hold its value.
Well, I have to agree with you and disagree with you a little bit on this one, Kyle. Like, yes, this is a super more expensive card if you're looking at mana cost compared to Time Walk. But if you look at most of the other Time Edition turns, that's what I'll call them, they cost a lot more than 5 mana now. This one is the lowest mana cost that is Commander legal. If you look at all the other ones, you're looking at 10, 7, 8 mana. So I think they've moved further away from that cost because 5 mana to do this is real simple now, and it's not too hard to ramp up to. So Wizards is definitely taking note to make it so that costs a lot higher. So it's not as easy to pull off as this card, but again, extra turns, always valuable.
Well, that's it for Tempest. We've seen the money cards, and we've already checked out our hidden gems, but now it comes time for us to rank the set as a whole. Stu, would you explain our ranking system to the people, please?
Of course I will, Kyle. So what we do for our sets is we rate them on a 4-point scale. The lowest ones start at bronze, then we go up to a silver, gold, and we finish with the crown jewel of a platinum. So, Kyle, tell us where this falls for you.
Well, I have only given out 1 platinum so far, and that was back in 5th Dawn, but I think this is going to be the second one, Stu. I am going to give Tempest a platinum rating, and again, in my mind, it was pretty much a done deal as soon as I looked over the cards of this set, because Much like Fifth Dawn, although Fifth Dawn did it at a later time than Tempest was, Tempest is probably one of the gold standards of Magic as a whole. I say gold, I really mean the platinum standard of Magic as a whole, of course, because there's just so many powerful cards here. Such a concentration of powerful cards, of cool cards. You look at things like Wasteland, Scroll Rack, backbones of stupid broken combos like Reanimate and Intuition and Earthcraft, and then even back at some really cool little ones like Recycle, which is one of my pet favorites from back in my hidden gems. But look at some of these cards. I mean, the quality is just so insane even to this day, and there's a reason why many veteran Magic players out there consider Tempest to be their favorite set and the best set of all time. It is the only set to have ever been reprinted in a remastered version up to this date, and the cards that are powerful in it now will continue to be powerful and will continue to do the same things as they have always done that make them powerful far into the future. Of course, there will be new things that come up that maybe change the value of some of these slightly, but overall, I don't really see the numbers going any place on any of these. I think the value here is really here to stay, and especially in the money cards. I think the fact that the lowest money card on our list is still about $17 really puts a huge price tag on the value of this set. So, platinum rating for Tempest, that is my call.
I'm 100% all the way with you on that one, Kyle. This is platinum, and it's by no little margin. It is huge. If you think about the money cards we just talked about, like just seeing the range, the highest one that we're talking about here was like from $35, and our lowest one is $17. That's 10 cards there. Usually if you have a set that kind of is like, like you start after like the first like 5 or 6, they become worth like $5-ish. All these cards are huge in the game of Magic. But also, like you said with our hidden gems, I was thrilled with what I found. And these are some of the cards I thought were like monumental in the game for like solid foundation. But not only that alone, there was no real archetype of card that I felt was like mal-supported. Like we saw very strong artifacts, we saw very strong enchantments, and creatures even. Like, I mean, I guarantee if we had planeswalkers back in the day for this set, we'd even see a couple really strong ones for that as well. But that's just me speculating. But I thoroughly enjoyed this set. I mean, these are cards that are very simple to read, but have huge effects. And that's something else I really like about it. It makes it so that if somebody is coming into Magic, it's pretty easy to understand what the course of this card does. You can use it for combos, you can get super technical with it, or you can just use it for face value. And for that, I like its simplicity, and I like its elegance, and the way how Wizards made this set, it's definitely defining a good point of how Magic play was, and I love it. So, platinum for me, platinum for you, Kyle, that's a winner in my book.
Well, that's our pool time for today, but if the water felt just right, you can also look back and take a look once again at our top 10 hidden gems from Tempest as well in the previous video.
Yes, and if you like the toys that we are playing with today, be sure to let us know which ones that you use in your decks and how strong they are for you in the comments down below. And if that's not your true style, feel free to let us know on Twitter at MTGTheCardPool or email us at mtgthecardpool@gmail.com. I'm Stu Galetta.
And I'm Kyle Robertson, and we'll see you next time at the Card Pool.